Hello, this is Mark Tooley, editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy, with yet another episode of Marksism, with fellow Marks and fellow editors Mark Livecki and Mark Melton, discussing this week transcendence as an antidote to American polarization, focusing in an article that we published by Presbyterian cleric and academic Mark Haas. And also we'll take a look at civil religion as exemplified at the presidential inauguration in Washington, D.C. this week. But Mark, your thoughts on transcendence as an antidote to polarization. The author quotes our patron saint Reinhold Niebuhr several times, who pointed out that the highest pinnacles of humanity are still far below the heights that God himself can offer, and that the demand for perfect justice almost always ends with even greater injustice. So obvious points from the Providence and Christian realist perspective, but much needed points, and especially helpful, at least this author argues, in terms of combating the extremes of polarization, which often are undergirded by extreme self-certainty and extreme self-righteousness, and appropriating powers to one's own self and one's own beliefs that should only be allowed for God himself. But Mark Livecki, what are your thoughts?
Yep, exactly that. There is an incredible amount of, as you say, hubris. I'm happy to say that there's profoundly prideful claims, almost to an omniscience, that obviously human beings do not possess, that you see at both extremes of the ideological spectrum. And that's profoundly dangerous for anybody to believe that they absolutely have in possession the solution to everything or to anything, really. Niebuhr's counsel of humility, modesty of purpose, those are deeply Christian realist aspirations. We must not believe that we can eliminate evil in our time, for instance, all while we acknowledge that we can eliminate certain evils in our time, and that we should go about the business of trying to do that. The 20th century is full of all sorts of illustrations over the horrors and the hells on earth that happen when people aspire to bring about the conditions of the eschaton, when we think that we can be the solution to everything. Whether it's a Christian who thinks that, we are the answer to our own prayer, or it's an ideologue who thinks that they can redefine the world order through the application of their own power. Humility of purpose, modesty of aspiration.
Mark Melton, is transcendence the answer to extreme polarization in American politics and culture today?
That's a good question. I think it was an interesting piece that I mentioned in my newsletter that came out earlier today, but I think it's definitely a possibility. I think, Niebuhr says a lot of interesting things on this in his articles that we published last year that came from 1945. He talks about the pride of victors in this idea of like all evil is in your opponent. And he's of course talking about Nazi Germany in that moment. And in this piece, it's talking about Abraham Lincoln and how he kind of had a similar humility when it came to dealing with the South and dealing with slaveholders at the end of the Civil War. And so there's a lot there that I think we can learn from. And I do think that, it seems that this idea that all of the evil can be in your opponent can come from this myth of progress, that we can improve ourselves to a point that we can eliminate all the problems in the world. And if you do have that view, then it's possible to, if you just eliminate your opponent, then you can get rid, just implement your own policy. But yeah, this humility should force people to realize that it's not possible. I remember years ago, I was on a mission trip, and in this area, people were, for whatever reason, kind of shorter. And so there was a phrase amongst the people of don't measure your height from your foot to your head, but from your head to the sky. And the idea was just this humility of, it doesn't matter how tall you are, you're still short in the eyes of God. And So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts when I was reading this piece, and I think it's a pretty good one that I think it's an evergreen piece that we can come back to year after year.
Well, Mark Lebecki, regarding civil religion, we just discussed that I had a Twitter exchange in which my sparring partner believed that religion should not have been openly present at the presidential inauguration because religion is a divisive force, a polarizing force, and instead secular themes of unity should have been advocated. But my response is along the lines of what we just discussed in terms of transcendence as an antidote to polarization, that in many ways we need a deeper and richer religious understanding of the limitations of humanity in American politics, that only by understanding those limitations can we de-escalate from the brink, so to speak, and that the civil religion that was on in full force during the inauguration with prayers by a Catholic priest, by a Black Methodist preacher, and also a special service at St. Matthew's Catholic Cathedral in Washington, D.C. It's been said that there was more civil religion at this inauguration more than any other since President Eisenhower. I think that's good news, and that these themes were about justice and humanity and all of us being created equally in the image of God. Without those kinds of reassurances, what other recourse do we have to preserve our democracy? So, Mark Lebecki, what do you think?
Well, one of the resources we do not have is a resort to secularity. In this moment, I wish I was significantly older than I am, because what I'm about to say would have more weight. But in all my years upon this earth, I have never run into anything like a secular language. There is no secularism in this sense. The idea that we can speak with religiously neutral viewpoints is absurd. We are deeply religious people. We will worship something. If it's not the divine, then it's something. Our best efforts at secularity are full of our own religious viewpoints. So first of all, that's just foolish. But secondly, sure. I think especially in light of the article on transcendence, this notion that we are insufficient is desperately important. And on display at the inauguration was at least a gesture or a nod toward that sense. And it might be, people can call it empty, people can call it just a sort of ritualistic, saccharine, whatever. But it plays a function. And I think a part of the function is a kind of recalibration to remember that as we move forward together, we need help. Everybody asks those religious questions. Even this guy that you were in the tiff with, people are going to ask, who am I? Where did I come from? What went wrong? Who's going to resolve this? When? From the great existentialists or non-existentialists, in the case of Albert Camus, they can't get away with it. They know this. And civil religion provides us at least a place for us to come together to share in a sense of the transcendent, if not the transcendent itself. And at the inauguration, I mean, it was so in one sense benign. Garth Brooks singing Amazing Grace, the Black Poet Laureate singing and performing an extraordinary poem which gestures to scripture in a sense of shared purpose. It's essential. It's at least a nod toward who we are. We see, yeah. So it strikes me as shocking that there are some among us who are so fragile as to be deeply offended and threatened by Garth Brooks and Amazing Grace. But
and I know you're easily shocked, Mark Lebecki.
Yes.
Mark Belton, would you propose banishing Amazing Grace from any future inaugurations, lest anyone be offended?
Of course not. I think it's kind of a bizarre complaint in my eyes. Yeah, as long, I mean, these people are genuinely faithful. I think it's reasonable to bring your faith into the public square. And I think what would concern me is a situation like we've seen in Russia. There was years ago, there was this big parade for Putin, and I can't remember which, if it was one of his inaugurations or something along those lines, or just a military parade, but there was like a general who was known for being a Muslim who was basically, when they came to one of the cathedrals, he turned and did like a sign of the cross for no apparent reason. And so something like that would obviously, I think, be a problem. But like just bringing your faith into the public square, as long as it's genuine, is perfectly fine.
I think there are some, I don't think, I know there are conservative and traditional Christians who object to civil religion because ostensibly it's vacuous, but to cite the power and justice and mercy of God, those are tremendously deep and rich principles in and of themselves. And because you're not including specifically the Christian plan of salvation, that in no way negates the other important messaging that comes through civil religion, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's
Yeah.
nothing to say, but yes, right.
I'd also add to that, like, Alan Dowd had an article about a prayer that FDR gave at their D-Day, this incredibly horrific moment where I forget how many thousands died at that day, but it seems incredibly appropriate to have a prayer, because I mean, most Americans, most people are going to have some belief in a God, and so yeah, those are very, I think, reasonable moments and gestures.
In conclusion, Mark Levesque and Mark Melton, as we enter this new era after a very tumultuous and unpleasant 2020, are you hopeful for better times ahead? Will America pull back from the brink? Will we once again look to the power of transcendence as an antidote to extreme divisions? Mark Levesque?
There's always a brink to fall into, right? Horses have two sides you can fall off of. We're not going to fall off a particular side under the Biden administration, but it's entirely possible we fall off the other side. Am I hopeful? I said it last week, if we want to get through this, we will. It's day 3. The world hasn't, or I think it's day 3. Is it day 2? The world hasn't ended yet. We'll see. He started off with 2 great things. He started off with a prayer at his inauguration. He went to Arlington. He laid a wreath. He did 2 things that I strongly and warmly support. And that doubles the amount of things that I thought he was going to do that I would support on day 1. No, I am not looking for Biden to be a solution to Trump. I am not particularly excited about the coming 4 years, but we'll see.
And perhaps the country has a life and vitality that is outside of the presidency, so we don't necessarily attach cosmic importance to the current administration or any administration.
Correct. I think we should participate in political life. Everybody who reads Providence knows that we advocate for this. But sure, this is a recalibration that we can stop looking for political messiahs. That would be great.
Mark Melton, are you still looking for a political messiah?
No, I think that's obviously not going to be the solution. So, yeah, we've got to, like Levesque said, we got to calibrate so that we have a realistic idea of what government can accomplish and also what the federal government can accomplish. I think a lot of these things we've learned over the past years that a lot of the decisions that happen at local and state governments are going to have immense impacts on our lives. And so we should probably spend less time worrying or focusing on the federal government and read a little bit of your local newspaper, or maybe even find out if there's a local newspaper in your area. And so there was one other point I was going to make, but I can't quite remember it now, so I'll just end it on that.
You were going to say you're going to run for political office yourself at the local level, and we can support your endeavor, right?
We'll start at HOA and see how. Yeah, we'll see how.
Right.
Probably not.
And Mark Melton, you depend completely on Facebook notifications for your own source of information, don't you?
I think there's a huge, I was actually thinking about this earlier. There's a huge problem where we get most of our news from free media. And when we do that, we are not consuming a product. We are the product that advertisers are trying to get to. And so subscribing to an actual newspaper would be a good step. And yeah, because then I think our views get so skewed by sensational headlines or sensational tweets and whatnot. And a lot of the news might just not be that interesting, but it's incredibly important to us that what happens at the local city council may be kind of boring to sit through. But I think if we're going to care about our neighbors, we need to understand what's going on in that situation.
So if that's the case, and I think that is the case, and I think that's a brilliant insight from our managing editor, perhaps Providence should do a service led by our managing editor in which we recommend 6 to 10 good news sources that allow one to read across the spectrum, to be able to increase our moral perceptions and empathy for the other side. What is it that they're thinking? What's important to them, right? Because we got to not just read a good newspaper, we've got to read several of them. So what are those good news sources out there that folks, other than Providence, that folks can rely on to find good analysis of breaking news, but also the perennial, more evergreen issues of our hour and every age? We should put that list together.
I would
Mark
put
Belton, we'll
pointers
look forward to it from you next week.
Thanks for it, because I want to see it.
Gentlemen, thank you for another scintillating episode of Marksism. Until next week, bye-bye.